Welcome to the Kingdom Women Podcast, a podcast by and for women who seek to fully and freely live the gospel reality of Christ's kingdom come. Through our candid conversations here, our desire is that our union with Christ will deepen and that his kingdom will come in us and through us, that we all may be free indeed. This episode is going to be about relationships when they don't go well. And how do we healthily and kindly and yet honestly and boldly navigate conflict and disharmony? Like, what do we do with that? How do we do it? So we already were throwing some things around here. Let's keep going, ladies. And Sarah Ornelas is not able to be with us as we start, but hopefully she'll jump in here in a bit and she'll join the conversation as well. Go ahead, Gwen.
I just have one thought as we start. I heard you say relationships when things don't go well. I want to propose right at the outset that conflict does not mean relationships aren't going well. So
good point.
So yeah, that's just a little clarification.
So what would you say instead, Gwen? Let's clarify. What would you say instead? Conflict is a normal part of healthy relationships. So how would you, what are we going to be talking about?
I think that healthy responses when relationships are not going well is important. I don't think that's the same thing as navigating healthy conflict necessarily. There is unhealthy conflict and there's healthy conflict, and I think we could talk about both.
Sure.
And maybe even help to discern the difference. And both of them, obviously, our relationship with God and our love for one another informs our responses to them or our navigation of them, but they are not the same thing.
Okay, so say more about that, Gwen, or anybody. Like, what's the difference between conflict is healthy and conflict is unhealthy? Go ahead.
Sometimes conflict can be a positive thing. I mean, like Joel and I have a very positive relationship, and sometimes we just, I wouldn't say we butt heads, but we just like hammer you out together. And I call that conflict, right? We might see something completely differently, but the conflict brings us together, right? And that's what healthy conflict is going to do, is ultimately it's going to bring us together. Where an unhealthy conflict is going to make the relationship weaker or make one person in the relationship weaker. You know what I mean? Conflict can be used as a weapon, or it can be used to divide people, or it can be used to bring people together. And we need to learn to navigate all of it, or we're going to be up a creek without a paddle.
I guess we're starting on a very, very broad foot. So I would say too, maybe there are some times when conflict, like there's a necessary boundary that conflict brings about in some relationships, that it doesn't mean that we need to have all our relationships close to us. Sometimes for safety, for our peace, for peace between you and the person, sometimes you need some distance. and maybe conflict shows that, or it shows that, okay, maybe this was an unhealthy relationship and we need to stop it, and maybe at some point rebuild it on healthier ground.
I like that idea. And I think sometimes we have to agree to disagree respectfully. Sometimes you have people that you really love and you're just totally not into what they're saying about a particular issue. And you have to let it drop and agree to disagree, but still be respectful and open and loving in a relationship, whatever it is. I mean, it might not be somebody that you are living with, then maybe you can't always like disagree respectfully on a long-term basis, maybe. I don't know. It probably varies a little.
The two of us have had some disagreements on some ideas that we go round and round and round, and we're like, we just need to stop this. Let's just not talk about this because we're never gonna, No, we just start going in circles, and I say, no, it isn't. And you say, yes, it is. And then we just...
You're telling on me.
Both of us.
But finally, you care about each other and you value
Yeah.
each other
Right.
more than you value proving that you're right. And
Right.
that is
Right.
the result of a healthy relationship. I think a lot of damage is done when we fear conflict or feel like conflict is bad. Avoiding conflict is really a fast way to erode a relationship, that we can't even discuss something that we differ on. Now, there are times that, never the twain shall meet. And I have some friends that on some of these issues, especially as it relates to, the pandemic and vaccines and things like that, that it's like, we see it so different and I love them so dearly. So we just, and sometimes I've even asked them, look, I really don't even want to discuss it. I've kind of heard both sides. I respect that, what you're thinking about that, or the processes you've used to get there, but I don't think there's any benefit in this. So I have shut down conversations like that with an understanding of the conflict, but the relationship has not suffered because
Mm-hmm.
of the quality of the people that I'm conflicting with,
There doesn't always have to be a resolution to a conflict, right? I think what's really
Right.
valuable when we have a conflict in a relationship, it shows us what the relationship is made out of, right? If we come to a loggerhead with someone and they just shut it down and they're my point is right, your point is wrong, almost like you're kind of dumb, you better listen to me. That should be your red flag to exit the situation, right? That's there's a big problem. We recently faced a situation like that, and it was like, oh, okay, that's what this relationship is made out of, right? Where if we have a relationship where it's like, hey, I feel one way and you feel another way, and we both feel really strongly, but we have enough stock in our relationship and we mean enough to each other and we respect each other, we can just kind of shelve that issue and not really touch it and talk about the 9,000 other things that we enjoy talking
Right.
about. It's a diagnostic tool, really.
And maybe there are other situations. I was thinking of a post recently on social media. I'm not sure if you guys would have seen it, but it was saying something like, if this sin is prevalent in your friends, in your social group, in your church, you shouldn't be silent about it. You should be willing to break the status quo, so called. Otherwise, things are not going to change. You have to kind of, because this area, this sin, I guess I can name it, it's racism. So this person was saying, who has dealt with racism in the church context, in the mission context, this person was saying like, yeah, we cannot allow it to continue, and we can't just like be okay with someone who professes very unhelpful things about people of other ethnicities and not give pushback. Like sometimes you need to give pushback, and I agreed with that post.
Sure.
It was pretty strongly written, but we wouldn't tolerate some other sins. Why would we just be silent if it comes to some things like racism?
Right. But when speaking up about issues like that, forms of oppression or things that this group of women is pretty passionate about, sometimes when we speak up about that, I mean, I'm running into this where people that I know and love and I'm committed to relationship with them take deep offense at my position and assume things. And I'm just being vulnerable here. Like, this is where I'm getting stuck. And how willing am I to lay aside our differences on something that I'm pretty passionate about, that I believe Jesus is pretty passionate about, but how that's going to affect my relationship. And I'm going to be real vulnerable. I'm trying to figure out how to navigate relationships when that happens, how to keep the relationship healthy and honoring of them, of others, of myself, of Jesus. Like, what does this look like when we deeply disagree about something that something something that affects other people in
Important.
relationships so deeply.
Mhm.
Important things. Like, this isn't just like, how shall we arrange our church pews? Or how, what is the correct way to, discipline a child in a certain area, where that's your life, this is my life. This is,
Mhm.
yeah. This is
Mhm.
hard stuff. I mean, this is current.
Yes, that's a
stuff for
different
me.
kind of thing than.
It-
It is for me too, and I think it depends on what you have in your relationship outside of that. If it's a relationship with another Christian or someone I thought was a Christian, can you be a Christian and not care about the oppressed? But anyway, maybe it's how we define. It's probably how we define oppressed.
Yeah,
They care
right,
about the ones
right.
they see as being oppressed.
Yes,
So
very much so.
yeah. So I would say with my siblings or family, then I can continue to have a relationship that is just on that basis of our family of origin or whatever, and just avoid the subject. We won't be close friends, but we can relate on some level. But if it's someone in the church, or I'm going to a church full of people who see that differently, I don't know how to make a win-win out of that. It seems like a parting of ways, but
Have you,
I don't.
the thing is, are they tolerant of your side of the view, or are they saying that your side is like dangerous? And so if it's something that you feel this strongly about, are you given the opportunity to explain, like, no, I don't actually believe in that straw man, but this is.
Well, I probably err on the side of really asking questions and seeking to understand where they are, because I don't want to appear defensive.
Mhm.
A defensive demeanor is off-putting. It doesn't build relationships. And I probably veer too far to the other side of, like, not even defending my point of view once I realize that there's this big divide. And I'm just, attempting to hear things, listen things out.
People say that sometimes women, we shortchange ourselves by adding a lot of qualifiers to what we say without meaning to. Like, we feel like we can't be direct and just say something, so we would add a lot of maybe, I think, like, not. I know there's room to be, of course, like, humble.
That's my problem,
and all
Rebecca.
that.
I'm too direct. And then when I realize my directness has really been mistaken, misunderstood, misinterpreted, then I'm like in hot water, and then I'm backing away and going, oh, help me understand. What did that sound like to you? And what are you feeling toward me? And what have you experienced me as? And where have I hurt you? And I'm backing away because, and how do we do this? Like, how, I just feel like I'm really just like laying all my cards out on the table, but I am a pretty direct person to begin with, which has always been the thing that's brought me conflict, because women in our culture are not supposed to be so direct. We're supposed to be hesitant and apologetic and ask questions and not make statements, right?
That makes me want to gag.
Yeah, but
okay.
that is a wrong
There's a
expectation, I think, because
I agree.
yeah,
there's a time to speak and a time to remain silent. And I think when it comes to issues that we consider salvation issues, that we will have to speak and then hold our peace. I think that there is a time where you had to say, look, this is how I see it. And I would consider your view to be hurtful to other people. And, while I still love you, I really need to be heard in this area. And then we can decide where to go from here. It's really, I'm somebody that hates hurting people, and I'll tend to avoid talking. I'll tend to shut down a little bit. But I know my counselor worked with me on being vulnerable enough to hear somebody else, but actually having enough of boundaries that I don't stop talking. Like I won't, because navigating a relationship takes vulnerability, and yet it takes directness. Like, I don't like when you talk to me like that. I need you to stop. You know,
Sure.
I'm willing to hear what you had to say. You know, and this is an example, but you really need to be polite when you're talking, or stop yelling when you're talking. You know, just saying things like
stop
that.
skewing my words, or stop.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess there's some kind of directions that we need to apply in a conversation.
I think what comes in, and pretty much every one of us on this podcast are more outspoken women. Am I am I right, or am I right? We are more
I don't know.
outspoken. and I think that tends to get us in trouble a little more. And I think some of the trick for me, and this is a topic for another episode, but how to navigate the cultural expectations, because that's another point of conflict. When we disappoint someone else's expectations of us, that makes them hurt, or be bothered, or just makes tension between us. That's another source of conflict. It's not just disagreeing about a subject or an issue or whatever. It can also be when I don't meet their expectations, or they don't meet mine. And that's another source of tension in a relationship. So how do we navigate with the personalities we have and the giftings we have? How do all of us, whether we have the outspokenness that this group of women has, or whether we are more culturally appropriate, if that's what you want to call it, how do we navigate the cultural expectations wisely and well?
Boy,
Yeah.
it seems like
In relationship.
it seems like that's where we have to, as people in general, we've got to discuss where our boundaries are as people, and we've got to learn to define what we mean. I think it's very easy. I mean, I'm a total outsider to the Mennonite world, and I've come into it. I mean, I married the son of a beachy bishop. Like, I'm in deep, right? And so sometimes navigating, I mean, you're talking about cultural expectations. It's like, it's a whole different world. And one thing I have learned, especially like with my mother-in-law, like, we've always gotten along really well, but I've had to explain to her, it's like, look, I grew up doing this thing that's totally opposite of the way that you do it. I mean, we're talking like really simple things, like setting tables, like different, really small things. It's like, I grew up that was totally the wrong way to do it. And just communicating on those little bases, those little issues, can make a big difference. I mean, we need to, if we run into conflict, we have to not be careful to not touch it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to be willing to get into, when we come into a conflict, to define why it's a conflict.
So maybe going back to the sources of tension in a relationship, maybe even defining some of those can help us unpack together how we navigate them healthily and wisely. So I think we talked about disagreeing on issues that can cause tension in a relationship.
I was going to say salvation issues, like what we consider fundamental doctrinal issues that are incompatible with Christianity, or did I say
I'm not
that
sure
right?
the term salvation issue is particularly. I think it's sometimes things that we care so much about that, like, some things are peripheral, some things we consider central.
Like adultery. You know, I have a friend or a coworker that would get mad at me because I don't really approve of their relationship. I'm just using an example, but that is what I would call a salvation issue. It's something that I can't approve of somebody cheating on their spouse,
so you're basically talking about belief systems.
Yeah,
disagreements of belief systems.
I don't like the term salvation issue because it says some things are central to salvation, but like there is a historical reason why some things are included while some things are not, like racism, when it they should be considered a core issue?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Core issues.
So-
Core issues.
Okay, core.
issues.
Let's agree on core.
Mhm.
Core issues
I mean-
and belief systems. Go ahead, Sarah.
I mean, some of that is just plain sin issues, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't know. I would put a whole different category. Like if I knew somebody that was like in some sort of an adultery situation, or somebody who, whatever, something really serious like that, they probably aren't going to be in my inner circle, right? But I mean,
It's
I guess
hard when it's your relative or very
Sure.
close friend. That happens sometimes. It's
Sure.
people that you were close to, and suddenly your relationships are
Yeah.
being redefined because of sin, really, or
Sure.
and yeah. So that you have to navigate. Okay, that happened to me years ago. I was really close friends with somebody, and she disappeared basically. And I found out later she was living with somebody who was divorced several times, and I felt dropped like a hot potato. I actually
Wow.
grieved that relationship, that loss, and I had to navigate working through even arguments with other friends that wanted to, I don't know, condemn or whatever, and I didn't know how. So yeah, I had to really, it was a loaded emotional equation for me that I had to learn to deal with. So I had arguments over that relationship with other people. I'm like, you can't condemn her. She's not in hell yet, you know, and stuff that got really passionate, and then I had to deal with my own grief. So there was that, you know, people that I loved, and we disagreed in a way that wasn't compatible because I wasn't going to affirm the next relationship. Anyway, long story short, I grieved and went on, and we're friends today. So, but we're not close. But that was a core difference that I had to really come to terms with. So yeah, just stuff like that, you know, complicated things that get in the way of even relationships with family that are very hurtful. But you still have to maintain dignity and love for the individual, and it's hard.
Sure. You have to be willing to let the relationship change and develop,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to be hurt. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if pride has no place in a relationship, it just doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think where conflict becomes the most destructive, is if we're proud or the person we're conflicting with is proud. You're not going to resolve that. You're just not. That's God's issue at that point.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that irks me, I guess, I think, is that when Christians think that our entire world needs to be Christians like us, and then the verse comes up, oh, friendship with the world is enmity with God. I think that talks more about our own compromise. We need to have relationships that are outside of our church circle and just the people who practice and agree exactly with us. We need to have relationships with people out there that we would consider whatever people who are not Christians, who may not follow the same ethic
I
of
totally
life.
agree.
And even within our own church family, I don't think that, like what you were describing as, believing exactly the same. We need friendships outside our group that, whatever. But even within, and maybe it's because we are less isolated as communities. None of us are isolated the way our parents were, and our parents weren't isolated in one, my grandparents lived and worked and rarely traveled outside of, a 60, 100-mile radius their entire lives, because that was where they lived. And now we're so globally connected. And so our churches are a lot more, there's a lot more, just not just in plain churches or conservative Anabaptist churches or whatever, but in general, there's a lot more coming and going of people. And so there's a lot more mix of beliefs and thinking and ways of doing things. And so in my own church family, there are so many different opinions on so many things. And I do not think that unity is that we all think and believe exactly the same way, because we're all in process, right? But unity is when I say my connection with you and Jesus matters more than what I believe, even though I'm going to hold tight to this and I really want to convince you that this is right. My connection, my unity with Christ, I will not allow conflict with you on an issue to sever that unity with Christ or unity with you. Unity is we meet at Jesus' feet in worship, right? So yeah. But even though we want to have that, I think all of us here would say, yeah, that's a good position, right? Even though we want to have that stance, we still butt heads and we still disappoint each other. And so back to what causes tension, it's disagreeing about things that we find important, belief systems and issues that we find, core issues we find are just crucial. So there's disagreements about that. We disappoint people and people disappoint us in expectations. Sometimes people say things or do things that just feel hurtful, whether intentional or not. And when those things arise, what's the healthy path through it? And Sarah a little bit ago talked about pride, that there's no place for pride. And I think that's probably my downfall. Like, I want to be right. I want to be right. And I want you to know I'm right. I want you to be convinced I'm right. And I don't want to be wrong in either what I believe or in how I've approached you. It's hard for me to, just own that this felt hurtful to you. And that it did hurt you, whether I intended it to or not. Yeah, but there's just no place for that kind of pride. So I think that's pretty crucial to resolving conflict or dealing with tension in relationships.
Our world is really it's interactive, it's connected now, even with like social media, internet. And one of the things, I had a disagreement today online and I backed out of an entire conversation, and I'm just gonna be a little vulnerable here. And I analyzed it. I'm like, was I wrong? And I wasn't entirely wrong, but I was heard and I was respected. And my point was made and the person disagreed with me, but the context in which they disagreed wasn't wrong for them. They were right. And I had to come back to that. Somebody asked me later about it, what were you thinking? And I'm like, I was thinking that I am internalizing something wrong because I'm making it more about me and being heard, but I also need space to back out of this conversation or this social context when it happens so that I can connect, ground myself and come back healthy, because if I get too emotionally involved in something that's not that important, and I let it sever my relationships, it's not going to help me. So, and another thing, just to add this in, social media doesn't convey expression. It doesn't convey intensity. There's a certain layer that's lacking when you're connecting with people online. So what you think they're thinking may not be actually true. Here we can talk because we can actually see pictures of each other. We can actually see each other moving and watch facial expression. You pick up social cues that way, So that's different.
What did they say? What's the percentage of communication that is via body language? It's a pretty high percentage.
Isn't it 70
90%
something?
Huge.
Okay. It's
I was
high.
thinking 60-40 or something. I don't
Okay.
know. But yeah, I don't remember for sure, but body language is huge.
Uh,
Go ahead, Sarah.
I think one thing that's really important with conflict, I feel like I've faced a lot of interpersonal conflict. One thing that's really important, that has been important for me, is kind of stepping back and looking at my relationship with the person or the people I'm having a conflict with, and looking at why I value it and why we value each other, and the sort of relationship that we have, that is the basis of our relationship. It isn't this particular thing that we're conflicting over. And examining why I have this person in my life, right? It's because I care about them and I respect them and we respect each other, and we're, if we're Christians, that we both serve the same master, right? I mean, that's kind of the issue with the social media relationships, right? Is half those people are randos that we'll never ever interact with, right? And half of them, a good portion of them, will, even if we do know them, we don't know them in person, we don't know them well.
Mhm.
But when it comes to conflicting with um, people, I mean, I've had positive conflict and really negative conflict with people, and the outcome all boiled down to, does this person respect me, and do I respect them? And if the
Mhm.
answer to either of those things is no, and there's a valid reason not to really get along, that's
Mhm.
when you break that off. But if you have respectful relationships back and forth, it really doesn't matter where you come out on things. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? If you conflict really hard on something, I mean, I have friends who are atheists. I have friends who are into
Mhm.
all kinds of stuff that I would not want to go near with the 10-foot pole. But because we have respect for each other,
Mhm.
we can kind of leave that alone and connect on other bases.
Find common ground. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think too in the whole area of conflicts, and I watched this play out the other night in a discussion that where there was just um, just a lot of different opinions. Um, our triggers, we all
Mhm.
have triggers, right?
Mhm.
And so as I was listening to the discussion around me and paying attention to my own internal responses to what was being said, I was seeing some of the people shared a little bit of their backstory of why they thought what they thought or felt what they felt. And other people, I knew pieces of their story, and I could
Mhm.
see how that was informing their responses. And my
Mhm.
own internal responses, my own thoughts regarding the issue that was being discussed, are
Mhm.
very definitely informed by my own story. And
Mhm.
so I think when I enter into conflict with people, and I get curious about my own
Mm.
internal tension, and get curious
Mhm.
about them and what shaped them, and what's maybe created the problem that that they're feeling, or the tension that they're
Mhm.
feeling. Being curious like that gives me compassion,
Mhm.
which is going to make it
Mm.
give me a lot more energy to keep working at the relationship, instead of just writing them off. Now, sure, is it okay to step away and get some space and some perspective? Absolutely. But
Mhm.
yeah, to get curious and let that move you into compassion, I think is
Mhm.
pretty key too, to staying engaged and
Mm.
being willing to press in till the thing's resolved,
I
or as
mean, boy,
resolved as it can be. Go ahead.
that takes being vulnerable, that takes being willing to actually hear someone out and listen to understand and not to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mhm.
And that also takes being willing to say, wow, you're really wrong on this thing, but
Ouch.
I don't really care. You know what I
No.
mean? I mean, maybe I'm too direct, right? I don't know that I would say that to someone's face unless it was like Joel or something, right?
Okay.
Um, yeah, we have that kind of relationship. Like, please don't
I like it.
hear me out, but
But it's
if I have
great.
someone and like let's say we're gonna disagree about something, of relative importance. It's like I'm going to hear them out, and their viewpoint is valid. I don't care if they are wrong. Their viewpoint is valid. They're not stupid.
Mhm.
Like they can they can disagree with me on the apocrypha. They can disagree with me on baptism. They can disagree with me on whatever. Their viewpoint is valid. They're not just believing something out of thin air because they're full of garbage, right? They're
Mhm.
believing something. They're holding a viewpoint because they went through the same process that you did. Or maybe
Mhm.
they didn't. Maybe they just took someone's
Maybe it's
word
just
for
default.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And maybe they're not at a place where they're able to be challenged on it, right? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that being willing to be challenged on something can strengthen where you come out on things. Like,
Take
I
Mhm.
some
like being
humility
challenged on
too.
things. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Mhm.
It takes being willing to change, right? And maybe they're not there yet, right? I mean, I know there are some things where I'm like, you're not going to touch that issue. This issue is in a box, and you're not getting in that box. And maybe their box is bigger than yours.
Mm.
Well, this couple things that Sarah has said about respect that I think are really key. I I think the avoidance of conflict is often because we don't respect the other person enough. Now, we're talking about two different things. Sometimes you agree to disagree, you avoid the conflict, you keep the relationship. But a relationship that you can't even face the conflict together, or there's no way of getting across that point of conflict and even agreeing to disagree, because if you don't agree, you're not worth being in relationship with. Either somebody feels that way about you or you do about them. Let's hope you don't. But I listened to a lecture
Let's admit
on
that it's tempting
argumentation.
sometimes.
Yeah. I listened to a lecture on argumentation one time that was very interesting, in that it said that arguing with somebody is a form of respect. And I loved it, because I came from a family that we hashed over everything. We didn't just avoid conflict, we barreled through conflict and usually came out the other side. But we've been tested a little more in adulthood than we were as kids. But what I'm saying is, in relationships, the more you respect the person, the more you will try to convince them of your perspective, and the more you will want to hear their perspective. So arguments happen mostly in the context of respect and relationships. If I don't really respect that person anyway, I don't spend much time arguing with them. It's like, bullheaded, you have it your way, you know.
Gwen, I think that's your. I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. And
Okay.
since you like argument, I'm gonna argue. No, just kidding.
I don't like arguing. I value it.
Gotcha. Since you value arguing, there we go. No, but I think there that your experience informs your perspective, because in your home you respected each other, and so arguing, and you argued respectfully. It was not put down.
No, not really.
And yeah, well, you know,
I wouldn't
sure
say,
siblings...
Judy, in all honesty, my parental home was not a good example of constructive arguing. I would say, though, that it taught me to not fear conflict. But why not? But now I have some relationships that we do a lot of arguing. We'll emails back and forth about things that in the end we know we value each other, and that's why we keep on pressing this thing.
Okay, because my experience
my
experience growing up would be different, because the arguing in my home would have been, in my home of origin, would have been, okay, so when there was conflict in my home of origin, it was either you shut the person out, you stonewall, you just walk away, you don't even engage, which was very disrespectful, or you argue with attack. There wasn't respect with it.
Like ad hominem arguments.
I've had, well, just put downs and belittling and demeaning, not truly engaging with the issue at hand.
Right.
And so I have had to dismantle all that and relearn that if I really respect somebody, I'm going to stay engaged, even if they are strongly disagreeing with me. It does not mean what it meant in my home of origin. But I still struggle to see sometimes, especially when, because we are all human, especially if there is some ad hominem or things like that thrown into a disagreement, I struggle to experience it as this person is truly respecting me. Yeah. So I have a different outlook than you, a different perspective than you, because of how I was raised. Now, I would agree with your premise that we will only engage with, if we disengage with someone, it is a sign of disrespect. We don't honor them or respect them. We don't care about them enough to stay engaged. I would agree with you on that. But I think some people are going to hear you say, well, arguing is a sign that you do respect the person, even if it's unpleasant, you care enough. Some of us have a hurdle with that because of how we were shaped. Does that make sense?
Can I reflect this back to both of you? It sounds like Gwen is saying that if you care, you will engage. And Judy, you're saying that in your family, when you cared, you disengaged. That makes a lot of when it got tough.
When it got tough, we disengaged or we attacked.
Right.
And we didn't know how. We were not given much good example of how to truly care.
Mhm.
So when it
Judy,
comes
what
to
I would say
disagreement,
is that
go ahead, Gwen.
go ahead. Attack and argument are not the same thing. And when
Right,
attacks come into an
right.
argument, it is no longer healthy. And
Mhm.
people are not seeking to understand, they're seeking
Right.
to conquer or put down.
Right.
And
But it
if,
took me
if we
years to recognize the difference.
Mhm.
Mhm, mhm.
I have,
And so
I
I think it's,
struggle with
Yes, if I
that.
have to attack you to make my
Mhm.
point, yeah, that's
yeah.
ridiculous. That's
And so
not
I think, yeah,
that's not the kind of
yeah,
arguing I'm talking about.
right.
Right.
And so I would,
Mhm.
I would say, I would just reword what you're saying and saying, I will stay engaged.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I agree with your premise that we tend to we engage with people that we care about. But
Mhm.
but I'm going to be careful who I argue with depending on their triggers, because that will not feel caring to them. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? I'm not trying to pick apart what you're saying,
I
but see, here
no,
I
I
am
No,
doing
think
but
all the
that you're calling
qualifiers.
something different. I think you're calling something different arguing than
Well,
I am. And I was
if
it was actually a
Okay,
guy that did
okay.
argumentation and reasoning on the great courses that said this, that
Hmm.
you really do not argue with a person that you don't respect. And I'm talking about healthy arguing where
Mhm.
I present my thing. I want you to understand my thing and I let you present yours to me because
Mhm.
I care about where you are and we're back and
Mhm.
forth on this trying to understand each other. That's healthy arguing. Attacking
If,
is not the same thing. And if
yeah.
you're talking about just
right.
sharply back and forth and in a way that the other one doesn't feel safe, then no. But I think I would go,
Right.
what I'm talking about is somewhat beyond engaging, because engaging could mean that I just keep saying, well, I'd like to hear where you are. Yes, I like to hear. Yeah, well, tell me more. That's not an argument that is going to really help us understand each other. It's me being kind and polite and gracious to the other person. Am I
Yeah.
making
I
Yeah,
mean,
and
sense?
I wouldn't
Mhm.
I
yeah.
wouldn't call that engagement necessarily either. If it's only one-sided, that's not engagement. I would agree with
Right.
that.
I mean, you're talking about the difference between like
You
an
might,
argument and discourse. You know what I'm saying? There's a whole
Yes.
big difference between if I'm going to
Yes.
sit down. I mean, I was
okay.
a collegiate debater, right? And like we would sit in a room with someone we had never met before and we'd argue all kinds of crazy stuff. Like I had to argue in favor of abortion. I had to argue in favor of all kinds of things that I did not see the viewpoint of, right? I did not hold that viewpoint in any way, shape, or form. But what that did is make me go, oh, huh, okay, this point and this point and this point and this point, that's what they believe. I
Mhm.
had to put down all my straw men. I had to put down all these fake arguments that I was arguing against. I had to put down all of these like this temptation to be like, well, you're just stupid, right? I mean, I think we all have that temptation from time to time, right? To like throw names because that's easier than actually getting into the argument,
Mhm.
right?
It takes wisdom to argue well because you actually had to
Right,
think about how you argue. I mean, and I'm
right.
talking about debate because
Oh yeah,
arguing, I think what Gwen is describing is arguing as debate. You have a
yeah,
valid point. The other
Right.
person has a valid point,
Mhm.
and you're coming to an agreement on how you both can mesh your points or else not mesh them. But the
I
fact
like
is you're
Sarah's
both laying them on the table.
I
So
like
when
Sarah's
Mhm.
word,
yeah,
discourse.
discourse,
right.
Mhm.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, because if
Yeah,
you're
that's
having a
good.
discourse with
That's good.
someone who is arguing with you, that's not possible, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's where you have to be willing to step into the gap and go, hey, here's what I hear you saying. Do you
Mm-hmm.
mean this? Like, am I hearing you right? Like, you repeat it
Mm-hmm.
to the person, and then it's like, okay, like, let's put a pin in that. And here's where I'm coming out on it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Say it back to me. I've had to do that
Mm-hmm.
so many times in relationships with people,
Yes.
especially, I mean, where there are cultural conflicts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't even understand sometimes that there are cultural conflicts that are going to
Mm-hmm.
totally frame how, I'm
Mm-hmm.
defining a term totally differently than you. And then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wait, you meant this? No, that's a totally different
Mm-hmm.
thing. I meant this thing. And that can change the
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. Like, be willing. That's one thing we learned in debate. Define your terms, right? If there's conflict,
Mm-hmm.
sit down and go, okay, we're disagreeing on this issue, right?
Mhm.
Let's define what this issue actually is. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get way further ahead than you would with 3 hours of yelling at each other.
You're right.
And you,
And since we're talking about defining terms, let me read. I just looked up here the 2 definitions of arguing that I found in the Oxford Dictionary. Number 1, and this is the one I was using, give reasons or cite evidence in support of an idea, action, or theory, typically with the aim of persuading others to share one's view. 2, and I think that's what some of the rest of you were talking about, exchange or express diverging or opposite views, typically in a heated or angry way. But it does say typically. I think we've put a negative thing on arguing that it doesn't always mean. So maybe we need to leave that word because it's too loaded and use discourse or something like that.
I think it's a loaded term, but you, with your definition of it, that makes much better sense to me. Your argument, I would agree with completely with your with your definition. Like Sarah says, define your terms. With your definition, I would agree. Yeah, I still think even that for someone with my background, we have to learn to disengage our triggers sometimes.
Yeah.
Because of how maybe we've been
and it's humiliating conditioned.
Sometimes. Yeah. And
I
humbling. Also love yes. But
it's good.
Sarah mentioned a phrase that has been so helpful to me when people have done it to me, and it's been so helpful in my relationships when I've done it too. When you say, when you're having some conflict or some disagreement with someone, you say, and you bring out, you reflect to them what you're hearing. So what I'm hearing you say is, and then they have a chance to correct you or to say, yeah, that's what I mean, you know. But having something reflected back to a person, to yourself or to others, can be so helpful in just resolving even tension, because not only are you clarifying what point is being made, but you're also letting the other person know that you're hearing them. This is what I hear you saying, and they can correct you if you're wrong. They can affirm you and feel heard if you're right. And I think there's just some little things like that that can help de-escalate tension when we do have conflict.
And how I'd like to talk a little bit about how to disagree respectfully, because some of us don't have a huge, some of us don't have huge problems with people in their lives. In other words, they're going to maintain a relationship, but they're not going to agree on an issue. And it's probably not that important an issue, but how can we disagree respectfully while maintaining the relationship and placing value on the other person? I think maybe that'd be worth looking at. Right.
What was that?
Not try to.
Don't try to win.
Right. Don't bring an issue that you're passionate about that they disagree with every time you see them. And sometimes arguing is fun. You know, even disagreeing is fun. Because you could disagree and you know that you're not going to lose the other person because of it.
Yeah.
I think
that's a very safe relationship.
You have to keep the other person's emotions in mind. Like, they might usually enjoy it, but maybe they're not in a good space. And sometimes the argument doesn't go well because somebody's like, well, actually, I think I need to stop because I'm not in a good place and I had a bad day or something. And it's not the argument mainly, but it could be just not being emotionally in the right space or frame of mind to have that conversation. There's such thing called cognitive overload, where there's so much going on that you just need to stop. You know, you need to rest. You cannot pile on more. And we kind of need to maybe have the self-knowledge to recognize that in ourselves and also see, like, kind of see the other person's emotions as being part of the argument too, not just thoughts.
Yeah, self-awareness. Right. Yeah, self-awareness is huge. And also aware or intuiting or paying attention to other people's cues.
Body language, right? Cues. I was just reading today, like when you're counseling, for my class, when you're counseling somebody, pay attention to your own body, like
Yes.
quicker breathing, you're like tensing up. You feel yourself getting agitated, then take a break, switch the subject, or just back off for a little bit, you know. So,
We don't
and
do,
that was,
we don't pay in our culture, in our you know, Western culture, we don't pay attention to what our bodies are telling us. We just aren't used to. I'm only learning in the past couple of years to pay attention
yeah.
to
And
what my body, what cues my body's
Mm.
giving me about what I'm actually feeling or experiencing.
oh,
I
I
never
think,
knew until the past 2 years that my stomach gets tight when I'm feeling tension.
Hmm.
I've only discovered that in the past 2
Uh-huh.
years because I'm not used to paying attention to my body. Maybe I shouldn't say it's our culture. Maybe it's just me, but I
no,
think in
it
general, a lot of
is.
people don't pay attention to what their bodies are telling them.
We've been taught in our culture, at least for me anyway, growing up Eastern, and that you're not self-aware. You don't think about yourself, you think about others. So like we culturally grow up putting ourselves on the back seat. So then and of course that goes with your body too. It doesn't matter if I'm beautiful. I don't need to be told I'm beautiful. Don't tell me I'm beautiful. You know, even little stuff like that.
And
So,
how can I even learn how to pay attention to someone else if I don't even know myself?
Right.
I think that it's tied together. So yeah.
self-awareness and self-love are not bad.
No.
Self-respect, self-dignity, self-worth, self-values.
Well, yeah, and if we realize that, like, hey, we're getting kind of way too into this argument, that's where we need to learn to kind of back out of it and realize that we're arguing with the person instead of the idea. You know what I mean? If it's like, oh, I'm so determined to be right here, like you're missing the person entirely.
Right.
Like all you're doing at that point is playing a dumb game. And I mean, my dad always said dumb games get dumb prizes, right? So like your stomach's going to be in knots all night because you decided like, man, like you are so wrong on string theory. Like I could wipe the floor with you right now, and I'm just gonna wipe the floor with you because you're dumb, right? Like I don't even know what string theory is, okay? and I need to
particle physics and
I
string
don't
theory.
think
We're good.
most people- Exactly. I'm like, let me come up with something really obscure. But I mean, if I'm getting all worked up about an argument, at that point I need to step back and go, okay, hey, what am I really getting worked up here? Am I not being heard? Like I need to communicate that. Or am I getting attacked? I need to speak that out. Or am I not hearing the other person right? Like am I making sure that I'm understanding what they're saying? Because maybe I'm making up a straw man in their mind because they said like a phrase, and because they said this phrase, there's this whole list of stuff that's connected to that phrase in my mind. I mean, that happened just recently with Joel and I. We had a conflict with somebody, and there was one word that meant like an entire volume of definition to them. And it's like that word literally means like this little thing here. And that when we clarified that, I mean, it didn't entirely end well, but that point in the conflict cleared up everything. I mean, define your term.
Yeah, one of those loaded words is submission.
Yeah.
Submission, you know, like what does it mean? Does it mean putting yourself down, or does it mean just yielding to another person's point of view sometimes?
Right. I mean, I think at the bottom of it, we have to be able to, at any point in a discussion with someone, look them in the eyes. Maybe we wouldn't say this out loud, but it's like, I love you, you know, you mattered to me. And if we can't do that, our focus is wrong. And if we can do that, chances are at least we're on the right page. Maybe the other person's way off in crazy town, but if we can look them in the eyes and say, look, I love you, and I'm not going to let this divide us, maybe that's what matters. There I go, softening my point with a maybe. Bad.
You want to rephrase that, Sarah?
Matters.
Oh, that's funny. Well, this maybe is a good place to wrap it up. This is good. I enjoyed this. I miss Sarah O, but hopefully she'll be back next time. We usually wrap this up. We usually wrap this up with a trivia question. And, you know, I think our audience should know that among ourselves, we're always disagreeing with each other. We have this chat that we're always arguing back and forth. Arguing in Gwen's sense. We have this intense discourse.
It's intense. Uh-huh.
And it's good because we all respect each other. Like I respect each one of you so much, and I
Yeah,
appreciate y'all so much. And
we
I
are the
haven't even met
funnest
all of y'all,
bunch.
yeah, I haven't even met all of y'all.
And
in
we
real life.
value the relationship.
Yeah.
We seek a
And the
win-win
perspective.
because we value the relationship. Yeah.
And I think part of the reason we value each other so much is we know each other's stories. There's something about knowing story that helps us to feel connected and compassionate and empathetic for each other. And when there's empathy present, it's easy to disagree without dismissing the other person entirely. And we do that. So we often don't agree on some particulars, but it's really good. So maybe our trivia question, okay, and you might have to edit this out too, Rebecca, if it's not appropriate. But what is one thing that you disagree with someone else in the group about? You've disagreed with someone else in the group about. I got mine. I've got mine covered. I just pushed back on Gwen tonight, so there you have it. Mine's done. How about y'all?
Rosanna and I had a pretty brisk disagreement on who should be on what podcast, whether or not singlehood after marriage carries a lot of the same issues as singlehood when you've never been married. And yeah, we didn't give up very easily, and it was very helpful to hear other people's input on it, which this is a little aside, but I feel like when I'm really at an impasse with somebody that I really care about, that's my default. Get someone else involved. Let's hear, because I'm not seeing myself, and you must not. You obviously
or seeing yourself, you know, we're always right. No, honestly, I wasn't paying attention to the chat there. I wasn't reading every comment, and when I went, I still didn't go back over everything. So I know I was missing half of it. I disagree that singlehood isn't singlehood, you know, no matter what, because we face a lot of the same issues. But I don't disagree with you on the fact that single moms need their own podcast. I mean, being present for single moms and other, but anyway. So yeah, we disagreed. We disagreed.
That's good.
I was going to say that I disagree with Mrs. Hertzler on what words are considered inappropriate language.
Do you want to give some examples, Rebecca?
Oh, I think we're good. I think our podcast listeners would probably side with Mrs. Hertzler.
Sit there and have to bleep it out in editing, right?
Bleep.
And Rosanna and I have disagreed long and hard on communion, and we can go on and on about whether communion should be once a year or it should.
Oh yeah, communion's good enough once a year.
Well, I think the one thing we can agree on is I'm probably the closest this group has, probably the most right-wing leaning complementarian in this group, right? We can agree on that. So, I mean, you want me to single out one conversation? I don't really know if I can. We just debated it today, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't know. I guess I've really learned to enjoy like healthy debate and conflict. Like I don't have to win a conversation. I could be totally wrong. And sometimes it's fun to bulldog it, right? But
you can be totally right too. That's fine.
I kind of like when Sarah bulldogs it. She's funky. I like it.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, it depends on if I have half an hour to sit there and lay things out. You can tell when I'm sitting and nursing the baby because I'm having a debate on the KWP chat group.
She keeps talking, you know. She keeps talking, then we know she's good.
But what I've noticed, and you can edit this out if this isn't appropriate. What I've noticed is that when I start getting bulldoggy with Sarah, then Sarah's brain dead and can't think.
Hey. Oh boy.
It happens.
Well, that's probably when I'm not nursing the baby, and then I'm currently trying to like teach the 5-year-old how to read or something, and I don't have the brain cells for this anymore.
Well, we disagree, and that's great. Because guess what? When we disagree, we lay all our cards on the table. Now, that's kind of a gambling terminology, though. But when we disagree, we lay our cards out on the table so that everyone has the opportunity to change my perception of things. So because
Yeah.
I can't, if I don't disagree with you, you're not going to change me. Or
Right.
I'm not going to change you. So we can grow and learn by disagreeing.
Right. I think a key to the conflicts that we've had as a group is we hear each other out
Mm-hmm.
and we kind of agree not to go too far with something,
Mm-hmm.
and we value the outcome being positive. And
Mhm.
none of us are afraid to change our opinions. It's like, I can't
Yes.
count the number of times that all of us have been like, oh, I could be wrong on that.
Mhm.
You know, like we all do
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
those are such important points. We can't just be like, nope, my position's always right. I'm never wrong on anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, that's just dumb.
Look at us. Look at us. All this mutual submission all over the place.
Do you see
How
all
in the
these
world do
little
we get
red,
anything done on here? How do we
these
get
little
anything
red
done,
hearts
y'all?
flip?
I know. That's what I'm saying. It's all over the place. I love it. Well, this has been good. See you next episode.
Bye.
The Kingdom Women Podcast is a member of the Kingdom Outpost Podcast Network. For more articles and podcasts and resources regarding living in the kingdom, go to www.kingdomoutpost.org.